Welcome to my channel, Midsummer Myths, where you find stories like no other, packed with twists, drama, and unbelievable moments you won't forget. Now imagine this. You're sitting down at a quiet diner on a Saturday morning, still wearing the jacket that proudly carries the insignia of your service, the very uniform that represents years of sacrifice and honor. You just want a hot cup of coffee and maybe a plate of eggs before heading back to base. But instead of being treated like any other customer, a police officer storms in, slams his hand on your table, and orders you to leave in front of everyone. The officer sneers at you, throwing words meant to cut deeper than any knife, words soaked in arrogance, racism, and ignorance. And here's the kicker. This officer has no idea who he's humiliating. No clue that the man he just kicked out isn't just any veteran, but the commander of the very base that keeps the town safe. The veteran's name, Marcus Johnson, retired Army Ranger, decorated with honors, and now the commanding officer of Fort Haven, a military base that employs half the town and protects the entire county. To the strangers in the diner, he looked like a quiet man grabbing breakfast. To the officer, he looked like an easy target. But to anyone who knew Marcus's story, he was the last man you'd want to pick a fight with. Marcus had grown up in this very state, a small-town kid with big dreams. He enlisted straight out of high school, leaving behind a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital and a father who fixed trucks at the local garage. He saw the army not just as a way out, but as a way up, a path to service, honor, and a chance to give back. Over 20 years later, he had fought overseas, led soldiers through chaos, and returned home to command Fort Haven. But none of that mattered to Officer Tom Bledsoe, a man with a badge, a bad temper, and a reputation for targeting anyone who didn't look like him. To Tom, Marcus was just another black man taking up space in his town. And on that morning, with half the diner watching, Tom made sure Marcus knew it. "Get up. You don't belong here," Tom barked, his hand resting on his belt. Conversations in the diner froze. Forks hung mid-air. A waitress clutched her notepad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Marcus raised his eyes slowly, calm and deliberate, the way only a soldier who has stared down real danger can. "I'm just here for breakfast," Marcus said evenly. "Not in this diner, you're not," Tom snapped. "People like you," he paused, smirking, letting the ugly weight of his words hang in the air. "You don't get to sit here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus could feel every pair of eyes on him. Some were sympathetic, some were afraid, but none of them spoke. He stood, placed a few bills on the table for the coffee he hadn't even sipped, and walked out. Tom followed him to the door, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Yeah, walk away, that's what you people are good at." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't give Tom the satisfaction of seeing anger. But as he stepped outside into the bright morning sun, he knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because in less than an hour, Tom was about to learn that the man he had just humiliated wasn't some nobody. He was the commander of Fort Haven, and the entire town's fate was tied to him, and Marcus Johnson was about to show exactly what happens when arrogance collides with truth. Trouble brews fastest in small towns, where word spreads like wildfire and everyone thinks they know everyone else's business. By the time Marcus returned to the base, his phone was already buzzing. A text from one of his junior officers read, "Sir, we heard what happened at the diner. Is it true?" Another message from his sergeant major simply said, "Standing by for orders." Marcus didn't reply. Not yet. He wasn't the kind of man to let emotion lead him. Years of service had trained him to think 2 steps ahead, to measure his moves carefully. But he couldn't deny the burn in his chest, not just from the insult, but from the silence of everyone in that diner. People he'd seen at parades, people who waved flags every Memorial Day, people who claimed to support the troops. They had all sat there and watched. Meanwhile, Officer Tom Bledsoe strutted back into the diner like a man who had just conquered something. He laughed, ordered a slice of pie, and bragged to anyone who would listen about putting a loudmouth in his place. He had no idea who Marcus really was. He had no idea that the man he kicked out commanded a base that fueled the town's economy, that provided jobs, security, and stability. Tom thought he had flexed his power. In reality, he had just lit a fuse. The fuse reached town hall by noon. Major Daniels, a politician who built his entire career on photo ops with soldiers and ribbon cuttings at the base, received a call from Marcus's adjutant. Within the hour, the mayor's office was in a panic. A racist cop harassing the base. Commander in public. That wasn't just bad optics, that was a threat to the town's very lifeline. But Marcus wasn't done. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted accountability. Years of service had taught him one thing. Bullies never change unless they're forced to face consequences. And Tom Bledsoe was about to face the biggest consequence of his life. Marcus called a meeting with his senior staff. They gathered in the briefing room, soldiers in uniform, their faces stern. He explained what had happened, every word, every look. And then he did something none of them expected. He ordered the base into a 48-hour lockdown. No supplies in, no supplies out. Local businesses that depended on base contracts were cut off immediately. The impact was instant. Gas stations that sold fuel to military vehicles went quiet. Restaurants that catered to soldiers saw empty booths. Shops that relied on steady military paychecks watched their customers vanish. The town felt the squeeze within hours. By evening, the mayor was on the phone, begging Marcus to reconsider. But Marcus was resolute. "Your officer humiliated me in public," Marcus said coldly. He made it clear he doesn't respect the uniform, doesn't respect the men and women who protect this town. If that's how he feels, then maybe this town doesn't deserve our support. The mayor stammered, promising to handle it, but Marcus had already hung up. He wasn't bluffing. He knew the weight he carried, and he was done letting that weight be ignored. That night, as Tom laughed it up at the bar, clinking bottles with his buddies, he still had no idea that his smug grin was about to be wiped off his face, in front of the entire community, because Marcus Johnson was just getting started. Asterisk by sunrise the next morning, the town of Millstone was buzzing with tension. Business owners were calling City Hall non-stop, furious about losing revenue from the base. Delivery trucks sat idle because the gate at Fort Haven was closed tight. Soldiers who usually filled the coffee shops, barbers, and grocery stores were nowhere to be seen. And every angry voice had one common demand: fix this. But the one man who didn't think it was a big deal, Officer Tom Bledsoe. Tom strutted into the precinct like nothing had changed, sipping his morning coffee and joking with his fellow officers. "What, the base is on a timeout? Boo-hoo," he sneered. "Maybe they'll learn who's really in charge around here." His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, not daring to confront him. Tom had built a reputation not just for being racist, but for being vindictive. He wasn't a man people wanted to cross, but that bravado began to crumble. When the police chief stormed into the squad room, Chief Ramirez, a nonsense veteran himself, slammed a folder down on Tom's desk. "Do you have any idea who you kicked out of that diner yesterday?" the chief demanded. Tom leaned back in his chair, smirking. Some loudmouth who thought he owned the place. "No," Ramirez snapped. "That loudmouth is Colonel Marcus Johnson, the commanding officer of Fort Haven, the man who controls whether half this town eats or starves. And thanks to you, the base is locked down. Businesses are bleeding. The mayor is losing his mind. And guess who they all want fired?" Tom's smirk faltered for the first time. Still, his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "So what? He's just a soldier. He should have respected me. I wear the badge in this town." "Badge or not," Ramirez growled, "you picked a fight you can't win." Meanwhile, Marcus wasn't sitting idle. He had spent decades learning how to plan operations, how to turn the smallest mistake into an opportunity. And this was no different. While the mayor scrambled, while the police department panicked, Marcus calmly prepared his next move. That evening, Fort Haven hosted a community town hall, an open forum that Marcus had scheduled weeks before, meant to address base improvements and new contracts with local vendors. Now it was the perfect stage. The gymnasium filled with hundreds of residents, business owners desperate for answers. Camera crews from local news stations lined the walls, ready to capture every word. Marcus took the stage in full dress uniform, ribbons and medals gleaming under the lights. The crowd rose to their feet in applause, the same crowd that had sat silent in the diner now clapping as if they'd always been on his side. Marcus raised his hand, the applause fading into tense silence. "Yesterday morning," he began, his voice steady but sharp, "I was denied service in a diner right here in Millstone. I was humiliated in front of my neighbors by a man who wears a badge, a man who swore to protect and serve." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in, asterisk. "That man," Marcus continued, "didn't see a veteran, didn't see a commanding officer. He saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see. And he treated me, and by extension, every soldier under my command, as less than human." The silence was deafening. "But let me be clear," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Fort Haven stands for honor. We stand for justice. And we will not spend a dime, not a second, supporting a town that allows racism to wear a badge." The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Some shouted angrily at the mention of the officer. Business owners muttered frantically, realizing just how much was at stake. And at the back of the gym, pale and sweating, Tom Bledsoe stood frozen, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. For the first time in his career, Tom wasn't in control, and Marcus wasn't done. Asterisk, the fallout hit like a hammer. Within 24 hours of Marcus's speech, the story spread across the state. Headlines screamed, "Veteran commander humiliated by local cop and Fort Haven lockdown cripples Millstone economy." Social media exploded with hashtags calling for justice. Under pressure from every angle, the mayor called an emergency council meeting. The chamber was packed, the air thick with outrage. Business owners shouted over each other, furious about lost income. Families who relied on the base demanded answers. And at the center of it all sat Officer Tom Bledsoe, arms crossed, jaw tight. Refusing to admit fault, Mayor Daniels slammed his gavel. "This town survives because of Fort Haven. We owe our livelihoods, our safety, our very future to the men and women who serve there, and this officer's actions have jeopardized all of it." Gasps echoed as the mayor pointed directly at Tom. I am calling for your immediate termination." Tom shot to his feet. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. He was just some guy." Marcus, who had been invited to witness the meeting, rose calmly from his seat in the gallery. His presence was commanding, his uniform a stark reminder of the truth. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You knew exactly who I was," Marcus said. "You saw the insignia on my jacket. You chose to ignore it. But even if I hadn't been a colonel, even if I were just another citizen, your duty was to treat me with dignity and respect. You failed, and you disgraced your badge." The chamber erupted in applause, a sound that drowned out Tom's protests. The council voted swiftly. By a unanimous decision, Tom Bledsoe was stripped of his badge, his gun, and his authority. He stormed out, cursing under his breath, but no one followed. No one defended him. The bully who had strutted into a diner like he owned it had been reduced to nothing. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just one man's downfall. He knew that systemic change required more than removing a single bad apple. So he made an announcement that stunned the entire town. "Fort Haven will lift the lockdown," Marcus declared, "but only under one condition. This town will establish a civilian oversight board to hold officers accountable. No more silence, no more looking the other way. If you want the support of the base, you must prove this is a community worth protecting." The demand sparked debate, but the pressure was undeniable. The businesses needed the base, the people needed the jobs, and the council had no choice but to agree. That night, when Marcus returned to Fort Haven, soldiers greeted him with cheers. They had watched their commander not only defend his own honor, but use his power to demand justice for everyone. As for Tom Bledsoe, he disappeared into the shadows, a disgraced officer with no future. But whispers followed him everywhere. Every diner, every bar, every street corner carried the same story. The day he messed with the wrong man, and Marcus knew, as he looked out over the base from his office window, that justice had been served. But fate has a way of adding a final twist, a piece of irony that no one expects. A week after Tom's termination, Marcus received a letter. It was handwritten, shaky, the words almost trembling on the page. It wasn't from Tom, it was from Tom's father, a retired firefighter who had served the community for decades. Colonel Johnson. The letter began, "I want to apologize for my son's behavior. He was raised better. I don't excuse what he did, but I want you to know that not everyone in our family shares his hate. I only hope this town learns from the disgrace he brought on it." Marcus folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of the words. Hate wasn't inherited, it was taught. And while Tom had chosen arrogance and racism, others in his family carried a very different kind of pride. The irony struck him. The same man who had tried to strip him of dignity now carried a family, name forever tied to shame. While Marcus's name stood taller than ever, the diner where it all started eventually reopened, this time with a photo of Marcus in uniform hanging on the wall, a reminder of who had once been humiliated there, and of the justice that followed. Marcus never gloated. He didn't need to. His victory wasn't in humiliating Tom back, but in forcing an entire town to confront its silence and choose change, and that, perhaps, was the greatest revenge of all. How did you like this story? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories from Midsummer Myths.